Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and strength coach, and you are on the Steady Coach. Today we're going to be talking about worries and anxious thoughts about your symptoms and how to deal with them. If you're dealing with a chronic dizziness disorder of any kind, worries and anxious thoughts are probably a daily fact of life for you. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about where these thoughts are coming from, and I'm going to give you a new strategy for how to work with them that I think you're going to find much more effective than the standard just try not to believe your thoughts. So first, let's just define worries and anxiety. Worries are those thoughts that appear about your symptoms. I'm terrified my symptoms aren't going to go away. If I don't avoid this thing, or if I do this thing, I'm going to have my symptoms come back much worse. The symptoms are going to take me down and I'm going to end up in bed and I'm never going to get better. These and many other iterations of similar thoughts are the worries that come with chronic dizziness. Anxiety, on the other hand, is not the thoughts themselves. Anxiety is when your body is in danger mode. It's the physical expression of your brain and body being in threat mode, danger mode, or alarm mode. And in previous videos, I've explained this as the fight or flight response. But an easy way to think about it is just being in a state of stress. So anxiety can lead to worried thoughts, but anxiety and worried thoughts aren't the same thing. Now, in response to your symptoms, anxiety or danger mode is arising from two different components. The first is the actual fear of the symptoms themselves, because the symptoms truly are terrifying. But the second is fear that's more of a background fear or a background threat mode that's in your body that's not related to your symptoms. So let's talk about the first one first, because that one's pretty obvious. The vestibular system has a very close connection to our fight-flight system in our body. In other words, that response to threat. So when people feel dizzy, they naturally have this rise in body anxiety, this rise in fear in their bodies. And in fact, some researchers believe that PPPD and other forms of chronic dizziness are actually a form of post-traumatic stress disorder from a vestibular event. And what is post-traumatic stress disorder? It's when your body has a strong and lasting fear response to something that has now ended. And many of you can back that up from your experience. The first time that you got dizzy may have been an absolutely terrifying experience for you, and it would make sense that then your brain might get stuck in this cycle of fear mode, and that can lead to those worried thoughts in regards to having dizziness-related symptoms. But this is where it gets really interesting, because if we agree that that hypothesis makes sense, that chronic dizziness is a form of post-traumatic stress from an initial vestibular problem, one of the greatest risk factors for post-traumatic stress is actually having had prior trauma. Why is that? Because people who've had prior trauma naturally have nervous systems that are more reactive. In other words, their nervous systems are more sensitive to danger, and they're more likely to go into danger mode or threat mode in response to a new perceived threat. So this brings me to that second component of the fear response to your symptoms. While it may seem that the fear is all about your symptoms, what I've seen through my years of experience with this is that it's almost never about the symptoms. The worried thoughts are certainly about the symptoms. And some of that fear truly is about the symptoms. But the more fear you've had in your life, the more sensitive your nervous system is to threat in general, the more likely you're going to have that strong anxiety response in your body. And that again generates those worried thoughts. So to address fear of symptoms, we already have a bunch of tools that many of you have likely tried. Exposure therapy, vestibular rehab, cognitive behavioral therapy. those all address the fear of the symptoms. But if, as I'm saying here, the problem isn't so much the fear of symptoms, it's the background fear, it's the background danger mode that has nothing to do with the symptoms, that pre-existed before the symptoms even started, then if we're not addressing that, we're losing an opportunity to help you get better faster. Here's the way I explain that background fear or background threat mode. Think of it like a reservoir of fear. The more difficult experiences you've had in your life, the more fear has accumulated in your reservoir of fear. And the more fear there is available to be drawn from when you have a new scary experience. And as we talked about, having dizziness is scary. So the more of that reservoir you have that your brain can now tap into to respond to this new scary thing that's happening to you, the stronger the response is going to be, and the more likely you are to end up with prolonged symptoms. So what contributes to this reservoir of fear that leads to this ongoing sense of danger mode in the body and brain that, again, pre-existed and doesn't have anything to do with the symptoms? Often these are related to difficult experiences as children, but this can also be from life stress. This can be from interpersonal conflicts, and this can be due to simply not having your needs met, especially when you were younger. The younger you were when you were having some of these problems, the larger this reservoir of fear tends to be. In other words, the higher the background levels of threat mode in your body tend to be. So now let's talk about how to address these worried thoughts. And again, as we talked about more toward the beginning of the video, the general approach to this is for you to find the flaws in the reasoning of your thoughts, to try not to believe your thoughts, to expose yourself regardless and prove your thoughts wrong. But if you have this very strong fear response in your body, it's going to be very difficult to do that. So I'm going to propose an alternative method here. First, it's a good idea to identify when in your life some of this danger mode may have been coming from. And this, for some of you, is really simple, looking back at some of your more difficult life experiences. But for some of you, this is a bit harder. Some of you had happy childhoods, had relatively smooth upbringings without major stress. So there's a little bit of digging to be done here, but I can tell you that if you suffer from lots of worries and lots of anxiety, especially if all of that predated your dizziness, this is coming from some of your past experiences, as we just talked about. So again, step one would be to see if you can identify what some of those experiences might be. And in the free course and in my workbook, there are checklists and there are journaling prompts to help you investigate this thoroughly. But you don't necessarily have to go on a digging expedition here. Once you have some kind of vague idea of where in life you might have been stressed out or where you didn't really get what you need, especially when you were younger, see if you can visualize that younger you. And there may be several younger yous involved in this situation. So after that, your job is to start to learn to connect to those younger yous when you have worried thoughts. And if this is all new to you and sounds a little fluffy, I ask you to just give it a try. I think you'll be surprised by how effective this method is compared to trying to argue with your own thoughts. And the way to connect to them is visualizing them, so imagining your younger self or selves, and putting a hand somewhere on your body where you sense those selves residing. So you'll often find that when the worries happen, the anxiety seems to settle somewhere in your body, maybe your stomach, maybe your chest, maybe somewhere else. Put your hand on that part of your body, close your eyes, and visualize your younger selves. Step 3 is showing those past selves compassion. Think about how you would talk to a beloved person in your life, maybe a loved one, maybe a child, maybe a pet, someone who was scared but was trying to put on a really strong face for you. You would reassure that person, you would soothe that person, you would let them know that they don't need to be brave anymore, that you've got it from here. And I want you to speak to those inner selves in exactly the same way. So step 1, identify who some of those inner selves may be. Step 2, connect to that place in your body where the inner selves seem to be. Visualize them. And step 3, respond to them with compassion. Now, for those of you who are still skeptical, what are we doing here? We're doing 2 things. First, we are not focusing on symptoms. This is great. The less focus on symptoms we have, the less we're feeding into that cycle of fear and worry that keeps symptoms going. But the other thing we're doing here is we are addressing the threat mode in your body that's not the result of symptoms. We don't always have a lot of control over the symptoms, especially not initially in the first stages of recovery, but we do have agency in treating ourselves with kindness, and we do have agency in recognizing and trying to correct some of the causes of that background danger mode that's also contributing to our fear of symptoms. This method takes practice. So if it doesn't work for you the first time you try it, I encourage you to keep working on it for a few weeks. Every time you have those cycles of worried thoughts come up, you feel the physical anxiety, go to that spot in your body where you feel it and give those past younger selves who didn't get what they needed back then compassion and caring. See how it goes. And if you want to understand a little bit more about this method, there's a book that uses a very similar approach to working with anxiety that I highly, highly recommend. It's called Anxiety RX by Dr. Russell Kennedy, and it's one of the favorite books among people in my membership community. So it comes highly recommended by people who are suffering from chronic dizziness just like you. And also, if you feel like you need more guidance in the realm of self-compassion, in my membership community, I also have some worksheets, and in the workbook, I have some worksheets to help you develop this sense of what your needs are, what your needs were, and how to meet them yourself. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, please share, please subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your questions and comments below. Take care, everyone.